Hi, welcome to this special from Windows on the World and a follow-up to a show we did a couple of weeks ago, which was called Law and Providence. And we're going to be following up some of the ideas and the solutions in that show and maybe expanding it a little bit more. So do have a look at that show. And we've got information tonight which ties directly into what we were talking about. Specific examples have come up interestingly in the news, the mainstream media news over the past 10 days. So I'm going to be covering that. And really, we're going to be looking at balancing the books. Now, this is a concept that I've used for many, many years. In other words, if some body, some corporate body, such as a council or some other kind of organization, or even a bunch of debt collectors who are actually sending out paperwork and making demands which are inaccurate or even unlawful, then the books have to be balanced. And how do we do this? Well, I've had a lot of fun doing it over the years, and it's where you take your power back. And there's a lot of satisfaction to be had in that, as long as you know what you're doing. And that is the most important thing, because once you know the fundamentals of what you're dealing with, then you can have every single confidence about it working. And that is very gratifying. As I said, balancing the books. Then I gave an example in that show about Euro car parks sending me multiple parking tickets when I'd actually been given permission to park in this building, this car park. And it was really funny. I just sent them back to the managing director on his company's house address. So we had to go and pick them up from the post office and pay the postage, because I always put postage paid by the person who you want to pick them up, who's the head of the company. And of course, they'll be written off after that. And that's a petty thing, but I thought it was a good example to open up with. But we're going to be looking at some much more detailed and important things than that tonight. But I wanted to read something first by William Blackstone, a great commentator on the law, and he lived from 1723 till 1780. And I'm just going to give you a very important quote here, which divides the divine natural law from the corporate body and the corporate law. Persons are divided by the law into either natural persons or artificial. Natural persons are such as the God of nature formed us. Artificial are such as are created and devised by human laws for the purposes of society and government, which are called corporations or body politic. Now, the gist of that is that there are two different types of person. There's the living you and there's the corporate you. The corporate you has certain obligations, and the divine creation of you has inalienable rights. What happens when alienable rights are taken away? You're treated as though you are property. You're assumed to be property. When else are you property? You are assumed to be property of a court when you are incompetent, or you are an imbecile, or you are mentally deranged. So the way that a corporate body can get jurisdiction over you, over matters which are not particularly lawful, is to treat you as an imbecile. So you have to ask yourself, are you an imbecile or are you competent? And that's a test. Because believe it or not, most people are imbeciles as defined by law, because that's why they need representation in court or representation in litigation. If you learn how to usurp fraudsters, corporate fraudsters, and even courts that are acting beyond authority, then you're competent. So you have a level of competence. Most people don't want to do this. They want to go, okay, give me a template that helps me not pay my bills. Well, that is actually a dereliction of duty from the divine person and the corporate person. So you are outside providence and outside the administrative law system if you do that. Very important point that. So you have to distinguish between these two things: the corporate you, which has liabilities, and the divine you, which has alienable rights. Now, in this system of communitarianism, they're taking away your inalienable rights. All rights come with responsibilities. Only guilty people are accused. And you can see the results of that in certain court cases. So we're going to be going into that as well. But this is an interesting one, because in that show, Law and Providence, I talked about the single person's discount validation form. Don't fall asleep. It affects everyone in the country, in the UK. And my case was 10 years ago. I won the court case because it was a private company sending out these letters which were purporting to be from the council, and the council was basically lying, saying they went to Nottingham to be scanned. No, they didn't. They were from a company in Nottingham. And that company in Nottingham was saying, if you do not fill out the form, we will fine you. Interesting that this turned up on the BBC. Council tax fraud claims worth £290,000 uncovered. Absolute misleading headline. What they've done is they've taken away people's single person's discount on the back of the assumption, using a form which I told you you do not have to fill in. No one in the UK has to fill that form in if you supply the details which you are required to supply by law. In other words, an affidavit, statutory declaration stating you are the sole occupant of the property, and then you don't pay the inflated council tax bill, and you go to the magistrates in the court when they summons you, and you do exactly what I was talking about in that last show, which is to say that I've tried to remedy the matter, and they're saying I have to fill in a form from this third party which creates fraud, which it does, because it's not a council document. Because your duty is to the council, not to a third party interloper. So the third party interlopers are the parasites. They're making money out of nothing, and that is where the books have to be balanced. That's what that whole show really was about when I was talking about this single person's discount validation form. Let's see how they twisted it. Investigators, which is a data mining company, yeah, who you sent the form to, if that's the way they're doing it, and I believe that is the way they're still doing it. Investigators uncovered hundreds of, wait for it, false claims. No, the claims are only false if they're untrue. Now, what they're saying is, if you don't fill the form in, then we will take your discount away anyway. So they're not allowed to do that. Okay. Fraud investigators have clawed back £290,000 in false claims for council tax. No, some of those may have been false claims, but I'm stating that I believe that they're talking about the single person's discount validation form, because that's all they use to identify who's in the house, and it's a third party and you don't have to fill the form in. The money has been returned to Blackpool Council budgets after staff uncovered hundreds of false claims by comparing data records. Did they compare the data records, or did the third party make an assumption that there was more than one person living at that address because third party mail had gone to the address? That's why they send these things out. They're trying to take away the 25% discount by saying that there's third parties living at the address. Well, many people have maybe children who still use their parents' address. Doesn't mean they live there. That's why the statutory declaration and going to court when they issue the new bill halfway through the year, which they're not allowed to do, by the way. They're not allowed to issue a new bill halfway through the year. Council tax is also calculated on a daily basis. So when you go into that court, they've taken away your discount on the back of an incorrect assumption, and you're there to remedy it. In other words, balance the books. It says the money has been returned to Blackpool Council budgets after staff uncovered hundreds of false claims. The council took part in a national campaign to catch people who wrongly claim the discounts, usually by falsely claiming to live alone or by claiming they qualify for lower bills due to a low income. Now residents are being warned, wait for it, there will be zero tolerance, a zero tolerance approach to this type of fraud in the future. So here we balance the books. So what we need now is a zero tolerance by the public to the council creating fraud through the single person's discount validation form. Isn't it a shame that people do not concern themselves with things that really matter and that really affect them? And that is the important thing. Again, that's about competence and balancing the books. So they've taken away the 25% discount on the back of this assumption with a form that creates fraud. And they're now saying we're going to have zero tolerance to everybody who actually does not rebut this. So it's time to rebut that one. Balance the books. Now, another issue that came up when I was looking at news stories, which I've stored away, is this. Did you know that any police officer in the UK can get your bank account frozen? Now, I knew about this years ago. This is very, very important because with the corruption that goes on in the UK police, this can happen to literally everyone. We've heard, of course, about these people who were classed as far right and commentators. Usually they're just playing between the two lies anyway. They're not getting to any solutions, but they have their bank accounts. PayPal suspends their account. But there's more to it than this, because it goes now through every part of society. I filled in a form a while ago, and it was to do with film stock, with the buying and selling of film stock. And they must have looked at my website and refused me, you see, because they don't like it. This is the communitarian big society, the big global to local communitarian society. So how do we balance the books in this case? This is really what's important. You have to win the battles that you can. So yes, financial parasitism. Yes, there's something that came up the other day which is quite interesting with this. The Enoch Burke case. He's this teacher in Ireland who would not comply by calling a pupil their pronoun name. And because he would not agree to do that, they banned him from the school, but they actually suspended him, I believe, on full pay. And he kept going back to the school because he said, you can't sack me. I believe that was what it said. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just giving you the overview here. So then they got an injunction against him and he still kept going back. So they imposed loads of fines. Now he knew that that court was going to impose a fine and go into his bank account. What I don't understand is he had 40,000 euros in his bank account and didn't take them out. The first thing I would have done if I was in that situation is empty that bank account, get any property put into another name, and do that on the land registry. Make sure that you can trust the person at your property to put the property into the name of course, could be a family member. Makes it much harder for them to go after you, you see. And I told this to people years ago, and it does work. I know people who did this years ago and saved themselves an enormous amount of hassle, because with the administrative system, we've just heard that basically courts, the civil courts, we know that your employer and people who are bent within the police can freeze your account. They can do it to anybody. And there's nothing you can do about it. So you need to balance the books in the respect of how much money are you keeping in the bank. While you've got cash, take it all out. That is a very good idea, because in a way, this guy shot himself in the foot because he hasn't balanced the books. What he's done is he's become a victim of the state yet again. That's no good, because it means you're not winning, as we say. But there, yeah, this is the common good of the state, by the way. This is the state getting away with their system, which has nothing to do with the law, nothing to do with the law at all. And having read that out at the beginning, the legal you and the divine you need to come together. So this is not for people who just are self-serving and do not see the bigger picture and just want to get something for nothing. That doesn't work. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not providence. What I'm talking about is where providence meets the balancing of the books. And it seems to work. I've been living like that for a long time, and it's something I've thought about for many, many years. And I've actually lived by it. When I was living in the UK, I did this all the time, and it does work. And the main thing is that once you have your own authenticity and know what you're talking about, you're not going to get scared, are you? You're just going to stand your ground. And it works. It worked in the court cases it had with the local council. It worked with bailiff companies. In fact, it's really funny. I was thinking the other day about how many clamps we removed. We got these unlawful clamps off vehicles, and if people had taken that seriously, then these companies would have been out of business. And this is where the books are balanced. This is called balancing the books. So people have this fear of the law. The law is there to uphold your rights. Therefore, if you have been wronged, you need to rectify that. And that is really what I'm trying to get over in this show. Yeah, yeah. Yes, I agree. He's being controlled whether he knows it or not. Absolutely. Because this is the Burke case, by the way. Because the family are just using it to grandstand. They're not achieving anything. They haven't set up an organization to fight this stuff. All they're doing is saying he's in prison. Well, he didn't have to go to prison. Again, didn't balance the books, you see. So yeah, here's another one for you. This facial recognition is really taking off now, isn't it? They're openly announcing it after all the trials which failed. You know, they were 98% ineffective, and now the police are saying, well, they've improved since then. They can't have improved that much, can they? Facial recognition in Cardiff and around the UK. Anyone going into the rugby match was filmed, and that's going to be permanent. Now, I'll just go through what this is about. Live facial recognition enables police to identify wanted people. A core part of policing. This is from the Met Police website, of course. Every day, police officers are briefed with images of suspects to look out for, or they take a dislike to someone and put them on their list. How do I know they do this? Because I caught them at it, because I brought Crime Stoppers down in 2017 because they were doing just that. Lord Ashcroft took everyone off there overnight. The head of Crime Stoppers media, who'd been there for 15 years, resigned. He contacted me. He told me that everyone had been taken off. So that's balancing the books, you see, because they put somebody on Crime Stoppers who shouldn't have been there. They even insulted the lawyer and said, get lost, basically. This is bent police who've been putting people on Crime Stoppers they don't like. So this is going to apply to the facial recognition portals. What they're going to do is, if they don't like somebody, there's plenty of malicious people in the police. In fact, there's more criminals in the police than there are in the civilian population. That was proved years ago. So this again is about balancing the books. And it says over many years, officers have spotted individuals from these briefings and taken action to keep the public safe. They've got to keep the public safe. And the hypocrisy and the BS they put on their website is not to be taken seriously, obviously. But this is the point, you see. What if they just want a suspect? Because I know people who've been dragged in by the police in the UK and charged. They haven't done anything. And we know about people who are currently in prison who are innocent. This is quite disturbing, because in this communitarian system, you see, you do not have these inalienable rights that people think you have anymore. The police can put you in prison very easily, very, very easily. And I know someone who it's happened to quite recently. And this was done by somebody who merely has a lot of money and didn't like this person. So then people will turn around, the GB News viewers and the talk radio viewers will go, but we live in a democracy. This isn't North Korea. And that, unfortunately, is the mentality of those who are the victims of this system. But it doesn't mean you have to be a victim of it, does it? Yes. Yeah, what if they recognize you and they have a list of people and they put you on it and they drag you in for something and perchance stitch you up for it? Because they don't need any evidence to charge you. They don't need any evidence in the court. They don't need any evidence in the courts. You can just get put in prison. It happened to a friend of mine a couple of years ago. This person had mental health problems and he was put on some drugs, a liver cleansing drug. But it sounded very dodgy to me. And he said, oh, I don't feel right. I feel a bit off my head, like I don't know what I'm doing. And he had got a history of mental illness, this person. And he went round to see somebody who he didn't know that well. And they went to the police and said that he'd harassed them Next thing is, he's in jail for 6 weeks, couldn't get out. And the court didn't have any of his mental health details on the day that they put him in prison. This happens a lot. So when they're talking about facial recognition, what's it really for? Because they're saying out of 200,000 people who went into this stadium, they nicked about 2 people. But what were they nicked for? Were they charged? They don't even say. They don't even say, you see. So we never find out. So that's another thing. So I suppose that everyone's got to wear baseball caps at least, and that with a big peak on. That should kind of minimize the liability there, you know. But this is interesting because having this balance in the books approach did bring down Crime Stoppers in 2017, yet nobody in the UK, including the fake alternative and the fake mainstream media, would touch it. Even mainstream newspapers wouldn't touch it. So the police are putting people on a most wanted list, and the public are going phoning up Crime Stoppers and saying, I've seen him, and they're not wanted. So this is, well, it has to be taken seriously. Yeah, 2 PCSOs. This is one of the examples I gave when I brought down Crime Stoppers. I said to Lord Ashcroft, 2 PCSOs uploaded a picture of someone on Crime Stoppers, said he was involved in a hit and run. He got released, obviously, and these 2 got put in prison. But what if it's the other way around? And it's much more likely to be the other way around if it's the police doing it. So yeah, there's another thing as well that they have called proceeds of crime. I don't know whether you know about this, but here's another article from the BBC, which you can read between the lines on this one as well. More than £500,000 has been seized in police fraud raids. This was part of a series of raids by West Mercia Police's Economic Crime Unit as it searched businesses in Evesham, Worcestershire, as part of a month-long nationwide crackdown on fraud. So this is the tip of the iceberg. Throughout February, they seized more than £500,000 from firms suspected of being used to launder money. Anybody can be accused of money laundering for no reason, for absolutely no reason. In fact, I just got rid of a bank in the UK over a bill of 81 euros because they wanted to see where £200 had come from in my PayPal account. And they said they were going to restrict my account, which I closed it immediately. But they say suspected of fraud. So this could be just people's bank accounts are frozen. They can't open them again for years and the money disappears. I know that because I know people it's happened to. They've been accused of something and the bank accounts are emptied. This needs to be taken seriously, I think, for people who are self-employed and anybody who runs a small business. Because in this communitarian system, if you're doing something they don't like, all of a sudden you're a fraudster and they've got your bank account. So yeah, now that is a difficult one to get out. Obviously, once they've locked your money, you've had it. So again, cash is king. And I was also going to talk about the Criminal Cases Review Commission, because I did something a few years ago and I was waiting for them to respond for this case that I was contesting on behalf of somebody. And I was a witness in this case. And incidentally, according to the CPS, I wasn't in the Crown Court giving evidence, yet I was there in front of the judge and the jury giving evidence. So they even took me off the court listing. Long story, won't get into that. But Criminal Cases Review Commission, it says evidence that was not presented to the court or was available at the first trial. This is what it's all about, yeah? So in other words, they say that if you did not present evidence that they believe was available at the time of the trial, you can't appeal. Now, this is a very interesting thing because when I wanted to appeal, the evidence which I wanted to bring to the court had not been allowed into the court, yet they still said, as it was available, that they couldn't reopen the case. Well, it wasn't available because the police and the CPS didn't allow it into the court. So that means if the police and the CPS withhold evidence, they can say, oh, well, the evidence was available. It doesn't mean that you can have it or you had any access to it. Now, that is something a lot of people don't get. I talk to people about this quite a lot, and a lot of people can't read between the lines of what they're actually saying. So the police and CPS will withhold evidence which they say was available when it wasn't. And sometimes the evidence is not released until after the case. And in this particular case, when it was released after the case, they said, well, that information was available at the time. Well, the information wasn't released by the Criminal Justice Unit until 6 months after the conviction, after the case. So you're up against something which is not playing on a level field. They are not there to assist you in any way, which is where you have to learn again to balance the books. And it just takes a little bit of knowledge. HMCTS report in 2017, this is from the Independent, and this is the example I used in that case because the case that I was involved in was as far back as 2017. A lot of repercussions came out of it though, and that was my attempt to balance the books. And you can do it too. It says inspectors found that in 55.5% of examined cases, this is by the HMCTS, there were obvious disclosure issues before a defendant was charged. Prosecutors only dealt fully with these issues in 1 in 4 cases, and in 38.3% of cases, they were not dealt with at all. I have seen this, and the police routinely, they do it as though it's normal, destroy evidence or fail to put it into chain of evidence and destroy it. That's criminal offense, but there's nothing you can do about it. I said to the lawyer, I said, wait a minute, they've wiped the video evidence of the assault. That was the police assaulting somebody. They've wiped the video evidence of the assault. They've given the evidence bag back, which was ripped open, given to the person when they left. The desk sergeant had already had me thrown out physically from Medway Police Station because I was a defence witness, and I was waiting for this person to come out because I'd taken their medication to the police station. So they physically threw me out because they didn't want me there. And when the person came out, they've got an evidence bag, which is meant to be signed in with the time and the date by who put it in the safe and then signed out. It was blank. They do not give a damn. They treat you with contempt. So that is something that people who listen to this show, and I know they're pretty sharp, need to know about, because these cases. So yeah, this is another thing. Yeah, Zoe Gascoigne, chairman of the Criminal Law Solicitors Association, blamed the emphasis on speedy justice. Well, it's not speedy justice, is it? It's not speedy justice to railroad someone through a kangaroo court and put them in prison. That's not speedy justice. It says to churn through court cases in a time of cuts and public services. Same story in 2017 as now. Same thing. She added that defendants would be horrified if they knew the extent of the problem. Horrified. She said police officers rarely told prosecutors about evidence that could undermine their case or assist the defendant, known as unused material. So your evidence is unused material because the Crown Prosecution Service is there to prosecute. It's not there to help the defence, and neither are the police. But when it comes into criminality, the police, in my experience in the UK, have been very good at that. It says, and police's recording of sensitive information was routinely poor. Prosecutors were in turn accused of failing to challenge the poor practice by police or consider what should be handed over to the defence during a case. The result led to delays, trials collapsing. Well, it's okay if the trial collapsed, but it's no good if the jury, the dupes who are sat there listening to the judge and being steered by the prosecution and the defence working together, if they're going to reach a unanimous verdict on the lack of evidence and the evidence that's not been brought before the court, and just on the steering of the judge for them to do that, which I've seen many times in court. Trials collapse and defendants making a plea without all the evidence being available. Richard Atkinson, partner at Tucker's Solicitors, told The Independent that it was not at all uncommon in his experience or in colleagues' experience for disclosure to not be properly addressed until the door of the courtroom or the day of the court case. I can attest to that. And you've got some barrister rushing in, not knowing anything about the case. And then you see the prosecution and the defense working together because they've already worked it out in advance that this person's going to be found guilty. So this balance in the books thing is really important. Like nipping it in the bud is very, very important. If you get accused of something, you have to make sure you get the information. And if you don't get that information, you need to have it all written down and you need to be sending that in. And that has to be sent to the court because then you can get the case delayed. They have to delay the case. You have to have all this in line, though. If you haven't had disclosure, you get that into the court at least, well, try and get it in 28 days before the case and say, I haven't had disclosure. And then hopefully they'll give you time. But I've heard of cases going on where lawyers have said to people, well, I can tell you, but I can't tell my client. But if you see my client, tell them to leave the country. Now, that is incredible, isn't it? Because a lawyer obviously can't tell the client to leave the country because they'd be debarred for doing that. Interesting, though. Interesting. So it says another article, this is in 2021. Courts are close to collapse over police disclosure failures. So between 2017 and 21, nothing changed. And now they're telling you it's got worse. So the defense lawyers say system is facing a crisis as over 1,600 cases have collapsed due to omission of key evidence. This is from October the 21st, 2021. Defence lawyers have warned the court system in England and Wales that it is at breaking point as figures reveal a rising number of cases collapsing because of police and prosecution failures to disclose key evidence. In the year to June 2021, 1,648 cases collapsed over disclosure failures. But what about those that didn't and people were just railroaded through the courts, which is the norm, and got put in prison? And there's loads of people on remand, of course, because a Crown Court case, if they don't get bail, can take over 2 years now. So that's 2 years on remand. It says more than double the figure than in 2015, 2016. So from 2016, 17, it's got much, much worse, they're saying, by 2021. And now they're saying it again. So it must have deteriorated even more. So experts say the official figure may be the tip of the iceberg. Well, we know it's the tip of the iceberg because of concerns that disclosure failures are not always properly recorded. Exactly. So because they don't disclose something and somebody gets found guilty, do you think that they're going to say, oh, well, there was a lack of disclosure? Of course they're not. I mean, I had this with the CPS, just trying to get them to do their job. They wouldn't even answer the phone to me in the end. And a lot of this depends on who you get on the phone, because you might get someone who's got a bit of a conscience, but that person probably has no power to do anything. So I had conversations with a very nice woman on the phone. Oh, she says, oh, I know, I've heard of this happening before, but you can't do anything about it. And then you get passed on back to the change agent, who then just puts you on answer phone. I think the one I was actually trying to get in touch with was also dealing with counter-terror. I said, why are you dealing with counter-terror? She said, oh, we have multiple jobs. So, yes, it says prosecutors' disclosure obligations arise from the fundamental right to a fair trial. This is from a website which instructs lawyers and gives information. Sorry, I've just jumped onto it. It's called the Criminal Law Disclosure Process, crimeline.co.uk. Sorry, I jumped into that. It says prosecutors' disclosure obligations arise from the fundamental right to a fair trial. 8 centuries after the Magna Carta, winning! It is widely acknowledged that the UK's criminal disclosure process is failing. There is too often a failure to understand and apply the rules of disclosure, and a lack of communication between investigators and prosecutors. At best, evidence that ought to be disclosed inadvertently falls through the cracks, being missed, dismissed, or forgotten. At worst, material is deliberately withheld. Now, this is the legal system telling you that material is deliberately withheld. It says the principle is straightforward. the disclosure process asks police and prosecutors to shoot themselves in the foot by assisting the defence. They should be proud to do so, for in doing so, they are upholding faith in the justice system itself, since when have the police cared about that? And help to ensure that the innocent are not wrongfully convicted. When have they bothered about that? Not in my lifetime, anyway. The application of the principle has unfortunately been anything but simple. On 23rd of January 2019, the Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox QC, appeared before the House of Commons Justice Committee and theatrically vowed to crack the whip to fix the disclosure system. Empty words from someone in Wigan in a wig and a pair of tights. Mr. Cox told the committee, I intend to hold to account each responsible individual. We don't see this blemish rise again to stain our criminal justice system. Well, that worked, didn't it? The oratory of the Attorney General appears sincere. Well, it has to appear sincere, doesn't it? They always appear sincere on camera. It never works, though, does it? We must welcome his making this one of his central priorities. Of course, nothing's happened. When was that said? Quite a few years ago, I think. Okay, so yes, balancing the books is extremely important. That was on a high level. On a low level, it's really important. So yes, justice. Let's get on to that. Let's get on to justice. What does it mean? The quality of being just, righteous, equitable, or moral righteousness to uphold the justice of a cause, rightfulness or lawfulness, as of a claim or title, justness of ground or reason to complain with justice. Justice is the ethical, philosophical idea that people are to be treated impartially, fairly, properly, and reasonably by the law and by arbiters of the law. That laws are to ensure that no harm befalls another, and that where harm is alleged, a remedial action is taken. Both the accuser and the accused should receive a fair trial. Well, none of that happens. So the word justice does not apply to what's going on. And when these idiots on the radio say the system is broken, we know it's not broken. It's working exactly the way it's meant to work. And with the implementation of the Noahide laws, it can only get worse, because behind the scenes, of course, strings are being pulled with these big cases. So yes, the term balancing the books, I know I've used it quite a lot, but I'll give you the real meaning of that. Balancing the books in accounting, it refers to ensuring that the total of all debits, the money going out, equals the total of all credits, the money coming in, creating a balanced financial record. Double entry bookkeeping. The concept of balancing the books is rooted in double entry bookkeeping, where every transaction is recorded twice. Once as a debit and once as a credit. And that's a whole big area for creating financial fraud, by the way. Most people will understand that who are listening to this. The accounting equation. This system is based on the accounting equation of assets equals liabilities plus equity. Equity is really important because that means a debt has to be proven. So what we have now is debts which are not proven and liabilities which are taken into the county court which are unproven. And that is a problem if those court cases are held in private and unlisted, as we reported in that show, Law and Providence, and also when we talked about the taking over of property by third-party imposters. Yes, unnecessary fines, debt collection companies, bailiffs charging fees. Every type of usury leads to imbalance. Therefore, it's up to you under the divine law to actually balance the books and do that under providence. In other words, you have to have what they call clean hands. You have to be of an innocent mind. In other words, you have to know that your actions are correct under God. And then you can go into that administrative system and take it apart. And it does seem to work. That's really the message of what I'm trying to say here. And there are many ways to do this. And following the principles of natural law, it does seem to work. It's like you get a like divine intervention. So there is some kind of God's law operating within this system, but you have to find it. And when you get into their baseless arguments, it takes you away from that, I've found. So you never argue with these people. It's very important to learn. And it goes to everything in life, because obviously we did a show on that, own nothing, be happy, because you can't own anything. You have usufruct, a usufructory interest in a property, because you're going to die, someone else is going to get it. This is why, of course, it's best to put everything, if you've got assets like property, put it into a trust, because then no one can come after you. You can still use the property, but somebody else is the trustee and you've got other beneficiaries. So it all makes sense to do this. And this reinforces the own nothing, be happy, but not in the way that they're saying, not the way that they're stating it through sustainable development, like you won't have everything and we're going to live in the ecologically clean places in all the world and you're going to be pushed into smart cities on the biggest lie in human history, you see. So there's no providence in what they're doing. So any action which is under divine providence and balancing the books is worthy. And I think that's where the fun comes into it. It's a game to be played and it's not to be taken personally. And the extortion, like through local taxation and income tax, has to be balanced. There has to be some benefit or gain, and that can be created. And even if this means challenging them, but obviously it means that you keep your own books, you balance your own books, because everything that you pay out is taxed. You're paying tax on everything anyway. So why should you be offering to pay more than even these robbers state that you need to pay? See what I mean? Forms that demand information and do not have to be filled in, even if they coerce or fine you for no reason. Like we said with that single person's discount validation form. The same goes with police forms, by the way. People get scared. I'm not giving legal advice here. People get scared with a notice of intended prosecution. But what if that notice of intended prosecution, which comes from this criminal justice unit within the police, which is a private company, and it's just signed off by somebody with it's just a computer template? Well, I had a very interesting interaction a few years ago with police and insurance companies, and I won both of them. By won, I mean they had to back down. That's the police. What happened was, I think someone made a spurious claim against me and said I'd driven off from an accident. And this happens quite a lot with insurance companies, by the way. So what happened was, I said, okay, to the insurance company, there was no accident. And I don't want you jumping into my shoes and defending this claim, because there is no claim from the other side. It's spurious. What they want to do is a thing called subrogation, which means that they jump into your shoes, they go to these courts with these bulk hearings, and they all make money out of it. Now, my vehicle wasn't in my name. I put them into a legal entity, a name, a legal fiction. And what was interesting was that I found out that insurance companies are going into court, and your case, which is probably with a load of other cases, is being represented in that court by somebody not legally qualified. And I found this out over the phone, and that I will put, it's a video actually with a phone call on from years ago. I'm going to put it under this video when it's finished. And it says insurance scam exposed. So I said to this woman, I've told you, I don't want you jumping into my shoes. I don't want to be represented in court by the insurance company. If there's a claim, I want the claimant to come to me. But you've subrogated the case. And you're saying that you're going to represent me in court. And I said, are you legally qualified? And she goes, yes. Then there was a pause and she said, "I'm qualified to help you." I said, "You told me in your paperwork that you were a paralegal." And she goes, "Yes, I'm a paralegal." A paralegal can represent with court documents, but they're not legally qualified and they can't go into court. They're not lawyers. So what happened was, it was a well-known insurance company in the UK. And I said, "You've subrogated this case. I told you not to. There is no claim. If there's a claim, they can claim from me through the court." And they'd gone into court, and they obviously make money out of doing this. This is how they do it. And then I get a letter. "Well, we could argue this for weeks on end and never come to a conclusion. So, in the meantime, we're going to send you £200. Incredible, isn't it, when you think about it? That they're basically going into court with people who aren't legally qualified. And I found that out just by the idiot who's on the end of the phone. And that phone call I'll put underneath this. But it's just very interesting, you see. This is the sort of stuff that empowers you, you see. It empowers you to actually do things. Now, this is a funny thing with when these bailiff companies were clamping vehicles years ago, we had some right fun. And I said to people, well, if everyone started removing these clamps and registering their vehicles at addresses where they couldn't find them, or people swapped addresses and you register your cars, I'm not giving legal advice, I'm not suggesting you do this, but if it's in the name of an entity, you can put a vehicle anywhere, right? It doesn't have to be in your name anyway. So if this fraud is going on, if these land pirates are making up fees and taking your vehicle, you have to balance the books. And I balanced the books on many occasions. And I removed their clamps. I cost them loads of money. I put stuff all over the internet about don't pay them. They threatened me and nothing happened. Now, this is the point, you see, that once you get into it, it really is helpful. I had a friend and she had a Jaguar. It was quite a valuable car. And she had an outstanding parking ticket. And I said, well, first of all, you need to get your vehicle out of your name. You put it into another entity. You've got other entities, put it in that. And she did that. And the next, she phones me up one night. I was out and she said, my car's been clamped. What am I going to do? So in the morning, I phoned up. It's a small bailiff company. And I put on a voice and said, oh, you seem to have disabled one of our vehicles. We need to get to London. Put on this sort of barrister's voice, you know. And he said, well, there's this outstanding, this is that outstanding. I said, well, there's no outstanding ticket as far as I'm concerned. I can see. And he said, well, under the law, we can do this. And a lot of people, he said, a lot of people, they changed the V5 just to get out the ticket. I said, are you suggesting that anybody connected with this vehicle has done anything unlawful? Is that what you're suggesting? And he said, he went into quoting the law. He said, under blah, 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 blah. And then I stopped him again and said, are you giving me legal advice? And he shut up. And that clamp came off within 10 minutes because they must have been in the area. But that shows you a little bit of knowledge with these idiots is not a dangerous thing. It's dangerous for them because they get scared because a lot of these people are putting themselves above the law and they're issuing these fines. They're making the fines up. They were then anyway. And the books have to be balanced. So my point was that with these bailiff companies, you've got them running around all over the place. They're clamping vehicles at 4 o'clock in the morning. They're coming back at 7:30 for the money. The vehicles have gone. What are they going to do? If that happens, even if 5 or 10% of the population did that, they'd be out of business because they're working on low margins. And people would say, I've had enough of this. I'm not driving across London in the morning rush hour to get nothing, which is what they were doing. See, so it's interesting, all this stuff. That's why I wanted to do this show on it, like to kind of round it off. The people who get it. The majority never will, of course. So yes, this is interesting stuff. I'm going to keep some of this information for another show, I think, because I was going to go into some stuff about the Birth, Deaths and Registrations Act and how this ties into civil bankruptcy. But I think I'll save that from the show because there's been a lot of information in there. There's another thing that's really useful as well. If a debt gets sold on, look at these companies that have bought the debt. They are debt collectors. They are not the creditor. What happens with these debts? Say you owe Vodafone some money, or it's a council tax thing that's gone to Capita or one of the Equita, isn't it? Equita, or one of these bailiff companies. At that point, they've bought the debt. And they're not the creditor, the debt's been wiped out, not given legal advice, but this is what happens. The debt's been wiped out. There's a company called Frederickson International who were worth 3 billion, but they bought 8 billions worth of debt or something. It was just crazy. This was years ago when I was looking at it, but this is what they do. These companies buy these debts hoping they're going to get something back. All you have to do is ask for the deed of assignment. If they're not the creditor, they will have a deed of assignment from the creditor stating that they are pursuing it as a third-party agent for the creditor. And they're not. They bought the debt. So that is just one letter. Show me the deed of assignment. It works. I'm not saying that they're going to stop sending letters, because they do it automatically. But you can get things taken off very easily. And this, again, is balancing the books. Hope you found some of that useful, because I've found it very useful over the years, and it's served me incredibly well. And it's given me a lot of fun and satisfaction as well, because if the books are not being balanced, then you're being looted. You're being abused. It's a form of abuse. Financial parasitism and land piracy is a form of abuse. And if you know a little bit about what you're doing, you can stop that abuse, and also you can get recompense. So something to think about there. I hope that was useful. Over the past several weeks, I've been looking at more fascinating history. And because it takes a long time to absorb, I've just been doing these 3 shows, which have been in the middle of it all. I want to keep this information absolutely focused for the people who watch it. And I want it to be useful. That's the main point, because I'm doing this for improvement, for a lifelong learning project, which is being shared, and there's something being reciprocated. Because as we know, what we're looking at, this media, we're looking at talking heads all saying the same thing, all talking about the 2 lies or the same garbage. It's of no use. Or the fake remedy gurus hooking you in, hooking hundreds of thousands of people into things that don't work and have never worked and will never work. And that's the point of this, because I'm pretty keen on it, because it became a big part of the learning process years ago. And I found it worked. And also, you need to stop, I think, people, well, I'm not telling what you what to do, obviously, I wouldn't do that. But what I mean is that if you are sure within yourself about what you're doing, and you've looked at it properly, and you've got a bit of divine providence and righteousness, that's what it's about, being righteous about things that actually are infringing on your inalienable rights and also your civil rights. Again, it goes back to the legal person and the natural person. So these things are oppressive to both the natural person and the legal person. In fact, it oppresses the natural person more, because you start to feel as though you are being looted and oppressed. And that is very bad for your psyche. And the other thing is, of course, not to take it personally, because it's the legal fiction that they're after. But you still have to look after business, because you're in that system, and you have to balance the books. Very simple. So great. I hope that was useful. I've just started to look at the comments, but I'm not going to look at them. I'm not going to look at them until I've got off. But yes, there'll be more history coming in the next few weeks. Sometimes the shows may be on a Monday rather than a Sunday. And the reason for that is simply because time issues get in the way. So usually it's 8 p.m. UK time, UK GMT, 8 p.m. every Sunday. If not, it'll be on the Monday, and then it stays on YouTube. And do still keep listening on Spreaker. You can download the podcast from Spreaker. Everything goes there. And we're also on Odyssey, so you can join our Odyssey channel. All the links are on the homepage at Windows on the World. If you want to support the show and balance the books, because that's what it's all about, please do. You can do that on the homepage or email me at info@windowsontheworld.net, and you can join the £5 a month club. Helps to pay the bills and again balance the books. So I've reiterated that one quite enough, but it was the title for the show, folks, or it will be. So stay in touch with the website, and I hope that was useful and in some way inspiring. Thanks.